Thank you. I hope you've all had a good day. I guess I've got the privilege of trying to say something about the future of app marketing. So I sort of put my thoughts together over the last few days to try and just hone in on maybe what one most important message that I could share from what I've learned over quite a few years of this. And so that's what I'm going to try and share with you all today. And then not stand between you all and a drink, so I'll keep it quick. So I thought before the future, the past. So before Deliveroo, I worked at King on Candy Crush Saga, and those years over the last sort of 5 years were much simpler than things are today in the world of app marketing. So if I cast my mind back to early 2013, in fact, Candy Crush launched on the Facebook platform, so on desktop only in mid-2012, and then launched in, I think it was December 12th of 2012 on mobile, just before Christmas. And by early 2013, the game was doing tremendously well, and pretty rapidly shot up to more than 300 million monthly active users. But the world was much simpler back then, and actually, I mean, obviously it's easy in retrospect to make things look simple, and they didn't feel that way at the time, but really 4 things came together for that to happen. And these, I think, are still very important things today, but the world's a bit more complicated today. So these 4 things were that we had a rigorous but aggressive assessment of how much our customers were worth within Candy Crush. So rigorous meant that we really understood the numbers. We had a good understanding of how those numbers differed by market, by platform, and all of these sorts of important dimensions. But we were aggressive in it as well. So we really tried to make sure that we took all facets of customer lifetime value into account. We understood and measured that for every customer who came into that game, there was a sort of viral, a K factor that they would bring in some number of other people. So that was measured, and that was incorporated into the customer lifetime value of the original customer. We also measured, because King had other games, we measured that a certain proportion of people who came into Candy Crush would go on to play other games, and there was a revenue stream from that. So we layered in a rigorous but aggressive way everything that we could to come up with the largest possible sustainable customer lifetime value. And then, so that was number one thing that came together. The second thing that came together was, 4 or 5 years ago, cost per install was a bit cheaper than today. So that was a nice situation to be in. The app promotion had not become the sort of crazy competitive market that it is today. And so there was a cost per install that was low enough in comparison to the first item, the customer lifetime value. And then the other 2 things, King had sufficient cash in the bank to payroll whatever was required, and had a sort of level of ambition and attitude to risk that meant that the marketing team was enabled to just spend whatever it wanted as long as there was a positive ROI basis on a simple set of rules that were laid down. And so that worked extremely well through all of 2013. And towards the end of that year, things started to get a bit more expensive on a cost per install basis, and King began to investigate other markets and began to do TV advertising and things like that. But so there was this sort of simple world back then where these 4 things came together, and that was enough in that case. Obviously, with a great product, these 4 things are useless if your product is not good enough. But these 4 things were enough with Candy Crush to bring it to that sort of 300 million install level. Today, and looking to the future, things are rather more sticky. There's a more complicated, more expensive world out there. Those 4 principles are certainly not enough today, or at least not enough for most people, unless you've got the most amazing product on the planet. And so I want to spend a few minutes now just to describe what I think is sort of bring together my thoughts on what needs to happen for the future. And there's really 5 things that I feel come together here. Obviously, there's performance marketing optimization, the stuff that I just described, but taking that to the next level, being more sophisticated about it, more real-time about it, constantly refining your customer targeting, all of those sorts of things, and the set of capabilities that are available today to do all of that through, through obviously Facebook and Google and other such platforms, and also through loads and loads of third-party systems. There's a tremendous sort of capability there that wasn't there a few years ago. So at least the tools are better there to enable you to do that kind of optimization, and to measure it in good ways and to have good attribution. And you need to get really, really good at that. I'll actually go down to the bottom right corner now and talk about leveraging your product and customers. So another really essential ingredient today is to understand obviously what kind of customers you've got there and how you can get your customers to be your best advocates. Back 4 years ago, that was very simple in Candy Crush. There was a wonderful platform called Facebook that had very little constraints on broadcasting messages through your app to people's friends, and King did a very good job of making use of that to aid massive viral growth. Today things are more difficult. That's not a kind of free open channel, so you've got to be clever around that. But how can you leverage your best customers? The people who love your product, they are your best advocates. They can be your best marketing channel. So how can you do that? And then also leveraging your product. And this is obviously completely product dependent. At Deliveroo, part of our product sort of experience and part of our business are, of course, all of the riders carrying the food from restaurant to customer around the cities. And that's a tremendous amount of exposure if you can capture it in the right way. And so that's, of course, part of the reason that we make sure that as much as possible, we encourage the Deliveroo riders to wear Deliveroo branded kit, to have a Deliveroo branded box on their bicycle or on their scooter. And that's a sort of, a great, in some sense free, although it's not entirely free, marketing channel for us. And so, in your case, think about your product and your customers. How can you leverage these in ways that are unique to you? And anything that's unique to you gives you, of course, a kind of competitive edge in the space of advertising so that you can actually exploit it well. And this... coming now to the sort of top right here, sort of different mindset, different skill set. So one needs to be much more exploratory, much more willing to test out new things, new channels, new opportunities. Of course, alongside that top thing of, optimization through Facebook or Google or whatever those core massive channels for your product. But find new channels, explore new things. We all know the world of mobile apps and advertising is changing all the time. The things which take off sometimes for the long term, sometimes just temporarily change all the time. And so if you can find ways to use those to your benefit and advertise in those things where it's perhaps less competitive because you've moved more quickly than everyone else, those are great things to do. But that's a sort of shift in mindset. It's a shift of exploration, of searching for opportunities, as opposed to just kind of trying to optimize some existing channel. And so I think that's a really key ingredient, which is why I've really called out that exploration of new channels down the bottom there. And that's an ever-changing landscape, so really key one. Deliveroo recently explored doing some radio advertising. So, going back to real kind of old school advertising. And I was surprised to learn how far radio has evolved. And so you can now place radio slots that are customized by time of day, by the weather, by the location, all sorts of stuff. So our single radio campaign actually is on any given slot, one of 35,000 different actual little, 15-second bits of radio will play there, depending on all of those local variables. And so, these channels are, there's always new opportunities there to explore, and you've got to find the things that work for you. And I'd really much encourage that exploration. A long time ago, I mentioned that King moved on to TV at the end of 2013, and in fact, TV became its #1 channel. From having kind of basically 100% of spend being on digital, TV became the biggest spend there. There was a lot of skepticism in the business as to whether TV was a viable channel for mobile games. Are people really watching TV going to want to, is that the right thing? They're occupied with the TV, not with the game. A lot of skepticism, but we explored a bunch of things and found that it really worked well. Alongside that, some channels like TV are inherently expensive. It's a little bit hard to get started there without having at least a decent budget to go with. You've got to obviously pick and choose the opportunities a little bit, but there's a great variety out there. And the fifth thing that's sort of really the world of mobile video is something that is the majority of online time spent on mobile devices is in one form of kind of mobile video or another. And so how can you make use of that, capture that, advertise within it, make mobile video that people will want to consume? What's the relationship between that and your product that you can best exploit? And I think that's, that avenue has to feature somewhere in your exploration and your strategy, at least with the trajectory that mobile sort of time, the usage of people's time on mobile devices is heading these days. So those are the sort of 5 key things that I wanted to highlight. And then sort of key kind of ingredients from a process point of view around those. Experiment, explore, measure, do things in product, do things in marketing, do things in both. I forget who coined the expression that I read recently. This chap said, about once a day I randomly click on an advert. And it's about 50% of the time I'm surprised to see that no one seems to have actually catered to that fact. And it's amazing how often you can click on an advert and end up in a weird place that doesn't seem to have very much connection with that advert. And no one's really tied together their marketing with their product in a way that matters. And in a way that gives you, as the potential customer, a coherent experience through that. Don't think of product and marketing separately, think of them together and experiment, explore, measure. And this means you need teams of, these sort of cross-functional teams. Make sure that your marketers are working closely with designers, with product engineers, with analysts. These people together are more than the sum of their parts. At Deliveroo, we call that a growth team, where we put these people together, and that's becoming a sort of fairly common thing for many businesses to do. Whether you explicitly create such a team or not, or whether you just make sure that these people are working really closely together is going to be dependent on your circumstances. But these people working together are the right sort of tools, the right minds that will make good stuff happen. And then, finally, scale what works, double down on what works. When you discover something that seems to work, that's not the time to, look for the next thing that'll work. It's the things that work are very often the things that with more effort and more attention can be made to work 2 or 3 times as well. So that's, I think, a really important lesson. Those things where you suddenly discover something new that you didn't understand before, and it's allowing you to grab some new customers at a good price. Double down on that. Explore different permutations of that. And you'll find you can rapidly get 2 or 3 times as much value out of that single discovery than you initially realized. And it's only when you begin to see diminishing returns, that's when you want to move and search for the next great thing. That's really all I wanted to share. Something about my thoughts on the different components of where I feel we should all be looking, and then something about the process of how to get there. You want to, you can reach me at @VinceDarley on Twitter if you like.
I think it's probably fairly obvious where I'm from, but My name's James, and I'm from the ASO Co. One question would be, there's a lot of fraud at the moment, and given that well, I don't know how much you spend, but I imagine it's quite a lot. What are you doing on that front?
Fraud is definitely an issue when things appear to be too good to be true. They are too good to be true. So I think you've got to be very careful with that. And that's in that sense, I would, there's no magic bullet to dealing with fraud. I would say that's the one thing that there is an obstacle to kind of moving from new channels, exploring new channels all the time. That you need to be new ad networks. You need to be particularly careful of that. So I think that's just something where you've got to balance moving really, really fast and scaling stuff that appears to work with having that risk of fraud in the back of your mind and double checking that these are real customers I'm getting and they're spending real money and they're spending real time in my app, my service. That's just that kind of tightrope you've got to walk, I think, and be careful of. And I don't have any magic bullets, unfortunately, for that one. I wish I had. What I would say actually is in my experience, we did quite a lot of analysis of this. I remember about a year and a half ago in some advertising we were doing, and the fraud tends to be massively clustered into particular channels, particular ad networks, and so there's a moment when you need to just think about totally killing some of those where if they seem to have gone off the rails. And so that we ended up having to do that. And you can, if you've diversified a lot, very broadly across many such networks or channels, that you can be a bit slow in capturing when some of those sorts of things have changed. So that's definitely something to be aware of. And we were definitely a bit slow, as I recall, some time back.
Hi, Mick Rigby, Yodel Mobile. Vince, can I ask a question? Obviously, you're a UK-wide brand. I guess we live down in the south, so we know Deliveroo. How do you manage the fact that I guess you might not be doing the service in Wigan or in, I don't know, Coventry, for instance, and yet you have that UK presence? How do you focus on a locality when you have such a broad brand presence?
I guess there's two sides to that. We obviously have to distinguish between places where our service is available and places where it's not. Some marketing is very precisely targetable to locations, and so that's great. Others, such as TV, is to a lesser extent. You've got to just kind of take that into account in what you're doing. And there's different, and I suppose the other side to that equation, I would say, is that there's a lot of the more relevant and, in some sense, personal that your marketing can be, obviously, the better. And that means if you are a brand that operates in many different places, and we're UK-based, but we operate in 11 other countries as well, finding ways to capture that kind of local, more relevant personal information into your advertising, which is then targeted to those areas, that's definitely a very powerful lever for acquisition marketing and obviously for CRM type stuff. But that's hard to do, and we're trying to work through the right ways to kind of scale up that. In some sense, you can imagine this sort of machinery where all sorts of local information, events, restaurant openings, holidays, etc., come into some machine, and it does all of this sort of targeting for you. But we're certainly not there yet. But that's kind of on our vision to get there, at least.